So, there's no denying that value for money is an important factor when considering buying any game. Nobody wants to drop 50 quid or so on a 5-hour experience, but at the same token, so many modern games are just padded with outrageous bloat in a cynical attempt to justify their asking price. And in many ways, the experience itself would be far better if they ended things a little bit sooner. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 exact moments that video games should have ended but didn't. Number 10. The end of Chapter 1. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. It's no secret that Metal Gear Solid 5 had an extremely troubled production due to internal struggles between director Hideo Kojima and Konami executives, causing the game to effectively be released unfinished. The result is a game that doesn't have much in the way of a satisfactory ending, but does one worse by forcing players to slog their way through hours of copy-paste missions to unlock the air quotes true ending, which contains a literal game-changing revelation regarding protagonist Venom Snake. The Phantom Pain's campaign is divided into 2 chapters. The first is the main story missions that conclude with a boss battle against the new Metal Gear model, while Chapter 2 consists of 19 extra missions, many of them recycled from Chapter 1 to unlock additional morsels of story and the big climactic twist. And yet, it's such a chore powering through Chapter 2 to see out the remaining story scraps that many just simply resorted to watching the pertinent clips on YouTube. Clearly, the game's dramatic crescendo comes when Skullface dies and you battle the new Metal Gear model at the end of Chapter 1, and Hideo Kojima could have easily rolled Chapter 2's story elements into this part of the game. Chapter 1's climactic cutscene is a far more effective stopping point for this story than the utter chore that is getting through Chapter 2 and reaching the wildly divisive big reveal. Number 9. Arthur dies. Red Dead Redemption 2. Now this is possibly a controversial pick here, but Red Dead Redemption 2 is a classic example of a lovingly crafted game that's perhaps a bit too in love with itself and just didn't know when to end. No matter what your actions were throughout the game, protagonist Arthur Morgan's story ends with his demise, and given that you've probably been playing for a minimum of like 30 hours or so at this point, this is a fitting end for a beefy AAA Rockstar experience. Except this isn't the end. It's not even close. The game then shifts to 8 years later as players are handed control of the previous game's protagonist John Marston for an over-egged multitude of missions ranging from boring farm chores to mildly engaging shootouts. The epilogue takes 6 to 8 hours depending on your urgency, almost half the length of the previous game in fact. While the short epilogue that gave players more time with John could have been fun, this was just way too much. Developers need to know when to kill their darlings, and John Marston's mini-campaign probably, if we're being truly honest, should have been released as kind of fanciful DLC down the line, and not been baked into essential parts of this game. Number 8. Ryo heads to GUILIN. Shenmue 2. Now Shenmue 2, or Shenmue if you're going to be boring about it, will take most players around 20 hours to beat on a first playthrough, though per the game's nature, playtimes definitely vary wildly. Even so, it's a classic case of a game that just didn't know when to end, and drags on for a few more hours after it reaches a rather fitting endpoint. The clear climax of the game occurs when Ryo heads to the Kowloon walled city and takes on the Yellowhead organization, culminating in a thrilling battle against the outfit's leader. But the real target of his mission, his father's killer Lan Di, ends up escaping by helicopter, and then Ryo learns that he needs to travel back to Bailu village to continue his pursuit. Now this would have been a suitable cliffhanger ending after a riveting climactic boss battle, but at this point players are then asked to insert the game's 4th and final disc before the story continues on for another few hours. Here he just heads to the village and basically the game sputters to an unremarkable momentum-devoid conclusion, when this would have made much more sense as the gentle opening to Shenmue 3. Number 7. Would You Kindly? BIOSHOCK. Sometimes a video game serves up a plot twist so brilliant that there's really nowhere else for the game to go, and so it just makes sense to tie things off as soon as possible, and that is absolutely true of BIOSHOCK, which drops a brain-explodingly incredible twist about 75% of the way through its 10 to 12 hour playtime. Upon finally meeting Rapture founder Andrew Ryan, it's revealed that the phrase "would you kindly" has been used as a psychic trigger throughout the game by your apparent comrade Atlas to make you follow his orders without question. Atlas is, in fact, the game's real villain, Frank Fontaine. Meanwhile, Ryan gets you to kill him by using the trigger phrase to make the player beat him to death with a golf club. It's an astonishing, superbly executed rug pull, and one that the remaining few hours of the game just can't get close to matching. The remainder sees the player working their way towards Fontaine for one of the most woefully underwhelming final boss fights in video game history. Instead, ending the game on a mesmerizing Empire Strikes Back-esque downbeat cliffhanger would have set the stage perfectly for a sequel in which the players could then chase down Fontaine, with 2K Games hopefully taking the time to deliver a more worthwhile confrontation. Number 6. The Reactor Purge. Alien Isolation. Though Alien Isolation is a fantastic game for the most part, perhaps the most common complaint from critics and players alike alike is about the excessively overbaked length. Depending on your skill and the difficulty level you play on, it can take anywhere from 12 to 20 hours to beat, but no matter how you play it, this is the definition of a very good game that nevertheless doesn't know when to quit. While mileage might vary on precisely when the game should end, there's a strong argument to be made for the thrilling sequence in which Amanda Ripley initiates a reactor purge in an attempt to destroy the giant xenomorph nest situated near the reactor. While the purge eradicates a good number of the aliens, it doesn't take them all out, and the game then continues for another 3 to 4 hours as you deal with various malevolent humans and finally eject the remaining xenomorph out of the damn airlock. The thing is, it's just become too much. Alien Isolation has long become both exhausting and considerably less scary by the time that it finally ends, but curtailing it with the epic reactor purge would have resulted in a considerably more concise experience. Number 5. The end of the ship section, Resident Evil 7. Even the biggest fans of Resident Evil 7 will surely agree that the game dips majorly in quality during its final third. After traipsing around the ultra-immersive Baker household and surrounding areas for the first 2/3 of the game, the remaining few hours on both a wreck and inside a mine mark a considerable decline in quality. The ship is at least a more interesting environment than the mine and offers up the most action-packed segment of the entire game, while also dropping some crucial morsels of story to boot. But the mine is a deathly dull, damp squib of a section on which to wrap things up, an endless trek through mostly copy-paste environments until you loop back to the Baker house for the final boss fight. Though the lab hidden within the mines does provide some juicy story revelations, it's nothing that couldn't have been made available on board the ship. Plus, a dynamic final boss fight that spilled across the various floors of the ship could have been a lot more fun rather than the generic shooting gallery battle that we got instead. Number 4. VAAS dies. Far Cry 3. Considering that Far Cry 3 was largely marketed on the strength of charismatic pirate lord villain VAAS, it was a surprise to many players that he ended up being killed off in a boss battle roughly 2/3 of the way through the game. From here, slave trader and drug kingpin Hoyt Volker becomes the primary villain for the rest of the title, and few will disagree that he doesn't even begin to hold a candle to VAAS. He has his sporadic moments for sure, but he mostly feels like a garden variety action movie villain, and one whose concluding boss fight is a thoroughly naff QTE fest. VAAS conversely was the feature attraction. He was the guy on the box art and in all the trailers, so really the game should have climaxed with his defeat, right? Perhaps more could have been done to expand his role pre-death, but the game takes a sharp nosedive in quality and interest once he bites it. Number 3. The Vietnam War Battle, Death Stranding. Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding is a much longer game than just about anyone expected, and even if you're rushing through the golden path, you'll struggle to beat this in under 30 hours. That's significantly longer than most of the games in Kojima's Metal Gear Solid series, and as wonderful as the game is, it also represents peak indulgence on the part of a gaming auteur who has never once heard the word restraint. Now, Death Stranding's narrative is such a hilariously convoluted soup of themes and ideas that it isn't easy to decide precisely where it should wrap itself up. Now sure, the epic boss fight with Higgs is a pretty solid possibility, but the third and final battle against a manifestation of Clifford Unger set during the Vietnam War is a far more thrilling showdown. It's a tricky, dynamic fight with an affecting payoff, but of course the game ambles on for another 3 or 4 hours, culminating in a terrible battle against a giant whale BT and a 2-hour ending that's as incoherent as it is ambitiously unhinged. There's no denying that Kojima put a lot of work into those final hours, but that doesn't mean that they weren't also completely exhausting to play through. Closing things out with the more exciting and imaginative fight and then stapling on a more measured ending would have made much more sense. Then again, making sense hasn't ever really been Kojima's thing, has it? Number 2. The Farm, The Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2 may be a phenomenal game, but it's also one that ends up outstaying its welcome, with its unrelenting bleakness proving genuinely tiresome over a 25-hour playtime. Most players probably suspected that the game's climax would be the showdown between Ellie and Abby that we'd catch a brief glimpse of at the midway point and return to many hours later. Having players control Abby and taking on Ellie as a stalker-type boss, not unlike David from the first game, was an ingenious subversion of expectations, and felt like the right time for things to start winding down. And after the fight, the scene shifts forward several months in time for what seems to be an epilogue, as Ellie settles down to life on a farm whilst trying to put the past behind her. Tommy then arrives with information of Abby's whereabouts, and Ellie sets off for one more final confrontation with her. And so the game then continues on for another grueling 2 hours, as Abby gets captured by the Rattlers, Ellie infiltrates their compound, and the two fight one more time. Now this isn't to say that the extended finale isn't extremely well crafted from a technical and narrative perspective, but ending it at the farm would have felt so much more succinct. There were 2 ready-made ending points here, either Ellie choosing to move on from her revenge or leaving her decision ambiguous and wrapping up with a flashback of the pair dancing. And number 1, the true Orochi boss fight, OKAMI. When you think of brutally overlong video games, there are few that can claim that title more egregiously than than OKAMI, a visually stunning, ludicrously entertaining action-adventure game that needlessly clocks in at a ridiculous 30 hours. Many players likely assumed that the game was wrapping up during their first encounter with the 8-headed dragon OROCHI, though as anyone who's beaten OKAMI will know, this is really the end of the game's first act, and there are about 20 damn hours to go. Yet there's a very clear point at which OKAMI should have come to an end, the second and final battle against OROCHI in his true form, which occurs roughly 75% of the way through the story. It's a thrilling, challenging fight that would be a fitting final boss battle for sure, and yet once OROCHI is defeated, the game drags on for another 7 to 8 hours as you pursue the all-powerful real enemy behind it. OKAMI was already beginning to outstay its welcome at 20-something hours in, and a rematch with OROCHI felt like a totally reasonable place to go home, but this game just keeps going. It's proof perfect that there truly can be too much of a good thing. And there we go, my friends, those were 10 exact moments that video games should have ended but didn't. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules, so you can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice, where I do all of my streaming outside of work, and it'd be great to see you over there, my friends. As always, I've been Jules, you have been awesome, never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.